I decided not to postpone today's video until Donald Trump wakes up. And when Donald Trump does wake up, oh, there will be a lot of interesting things. And everyone is waiting for that. And the thing is, his special representative, Steve Witkoff, was a guest of Satan. And now we're going to watch together how it happened. And this is how it was. Steve Witkoff, Satan. They hung out together for 3 hours talking about something. And attention, 3 hours later, Witkoff left, and all this time there have been no official statements. But attention, there is what is called indirect signs that there is some agreement. First of all, Kirill Dmitriev is here admiring everything that can possibly be admired. And of course, we should reflect on what they might have agreed upon.
It was, well, a very useful and constructive conversation. If we name the topics, then first and foremost, of course, it's the Ukrainian crisis. And the second topic is the prospects for possible development of strategic cooperation between the US and Russia.
How interestingly, the Kremlin strongman has started to sing. By the way, he's in the 70-plus age group, an experienced Russian diplomat, but that doesn't mean he's not a fascist. So what are we hearing? So Ukraine and strategic economic blah blah cooperation. In my previous videos, I've repeatedly said that in a way a certain exchange is being proposed. But here, pay attention. There must be a complete ceasefire. If there is no ceasefire, then accordingly, you won't be able to explain to the Americans, and not just the Americans, how you're handing money over to Russian dictators, Russian fascists. This affects both the resume, reputation, and the overall reputation. And in principle, if there is no unconditional declaration of a ceasefire on water, land, and air, then accordingly, none of this will work. I see here that all the Russian comrades are losing their minds and saying, well, we're ready for an air truce. That's already a big concession for Ukraine. We want to tell you guys there's no need to rush with concessions here, because on some of these concessions will simply hang you out to dry. So everyone is waiting for a pause, but on what basis can we assume that things aren't actually that bad? You probably noticed and saw this wonderful message from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Suddenly, out of nowhere, China made a short but very powerful statement. Russia and Ukraine have already started negotiations, taking an important step forward. The current process of resolving the crisis has reached a critical moment. And at that moment, Steve Witkoff was talking with Vladimir Putin. I specifically tracked this moment. This is not a coincidence. There should be no doubt about that. The Chinese are obviously involved in this process as well. And when negotiations were being held with the United States, China, it's not by chance that among the tariff issues, a separate track on Ukraine emerged. That is also not a coincidence.
On our side, in particular regarding the significant Ukrainian issue, certain important signals were clearly conveyed. Corresponding signals have also been received from President Trump, indicating a mutual understanding.
I have a lot of photos from this hall. Well, it's quite charming. It would be a pity if this work of art by European masters were to turn into radioactive ash. But would it really be a pity? I'm speaking purely from an aesthetic point of view, and from a practical point of view. If you do not implement a prompt and comprehensive ceasefire, then all of this will be at significant risk.
Right now, the situation is such that our president has full information. That is, our signals from President Trump, but Trump hasn't yet been briefed on the results of this meeting. So I would refrain from making any further comments. We'll see when Witkoff is able to brief Trump about today's conversation. After that, obviously, we might be able to add something more to my comments.
I'd like to add to all this. A wreath on your graves. Well, that's just my own addition, of course. All right, got it. The time difference. There is some kind of preliminary agreement with the Russian fascists. Economy and Ukraine, again, I repeat my point. If a full-fledged ceasefire is not pushed through, then we can't talk about Trump's success. All these so-called sectoral, temporary, and other such examples are just for show. That would mean Trump got played again. However, since Ushakov is indeed talking about the economy, it profoundly implies that there is something substantial and significant there that actually allows us to confidently assume that this particular agreement is genuinely possible and achievable. Once again, I must emphasize, I truly don't know. I am actually quite curious to thoroughly check my intuition in just a few hours from now, but something deep inside me, my inner voice, my gut feeling, tells me with absolute certainty that this is in fact absolutely and undeniably real. So I think if there's no ceasefire, then we'll just keep sending more and more different types of weaponry to the Russian Fascist Federation. There won't be peace between our countries for the next 150 years. That's something we also have to admit. But a ceasefire is possible. For now, the Russians are thriving and flourishing. So we ask ourselves, what could have influenced the Russian position? I have a theory about that. In reality, as always, it all comes down to submarines with nuclear missiles and bombs. Do you think I was drawing your attention to the interiors of this Kremlin hall for no reason?
Meanwhile, Fox News is discussing the specific power that Ohio-class nuclear submarines might represent, which Trump allegedly sent closer to the Russian borders. Each one, just so you understand, carries 20 Trident ballistic missiles.
If we translate the word trident into Russian, Russians will get even more upset because trident means trident, as in the three-pronged spear. Attention, here's a question. How did it happen that American strategic missiles are named this way? This means that everything will be fine for us. And the United States nuclear submarines, wherever they go, wherever they are in the world's oceans, it's as if they're whispering Russian, because really, if you don't stop, all of this, whether nuclear armed or not, could be launched at you. But the Russians don't want that, and that's why they're talking about economic projects with the United States. And I've already mentioned what this could be about. The entire periodic table, well, accordingly, all those rare earth metals, there's been a lot said about that. Among the important things are the supply of equipment for hydrocarbon extraction, and of course the supply of passenger airplanes and spare parts for passenger airplanes, because the so-called rising from its knees fascists have major problems with this.
Each one carries 8 nuclear warheads. So in other words, a submarine can strike 160 targets at once.
Olya, why aren't you telling us where those 160 targets are? I think those 160 targets are right in Moscow. I believe that in any case, we won't lose anything we already have from these negotiations. There will be no limitation on Ukraine's sovereignty. All this nonsense about the Russian language and the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, they'll just keep repeating it like a mantra, and we'll tell them that if anything happens, we'll run you all through with a trident. The issue of freezing the front line is being raised quite clearly and unambiguously. At the same time, of course, Ukraine will never recognize the occupied territories. That is, I don't really know what I'm basing this assumption on. Well, I just want to be optimistic, but what if not, right? So if Trump says, if there is no preliminary agreement on a ceasefire, then the following scenario will unfold. Ukraine will continue to receive Western weapons in wartime mode. If there is a freeze, we will continue to receive Western weapons in a mode of preparing for war accordingly. Well, that's quite normal. If you truly desire peace, then you must diligently prepare for war. So very recently, people residing in the swampy areas were indeed saying some truly terrible and utterly disrespectful things about President Trump, harshly criticizing our beloved and esteemed American grandpa, a figure of great respect and admiration.
Donald Trump, no matter what anyone might say or assert, absolutely and unequivocally did not shut off the crucial flow of essential weapons and vital military aid to Ukraine. He consistently kept supplying these critical weapons while simultaneously sweet-talking us and repeatedly telling us that he genuinely wanted to bring an end to this devastating war.
Well, with teeth, you need to do something else. And what do we know? Trump is an enemy, says Abdi Aronovich Alaudinov, and perhaps today, literally in a few hours, he will be the first Chechen to apologize. And many years from now, Putin, if he hasn't been hanged by then, of course, do you know what he'll say? We were harshly deceived again. The fact remains that these words from Alaudinov indicate that the interests of the United States are, at the very least, simple and straightforward: to preserve the Ukrainian state within the borders that we control. Well, that's the bare minimum. Plus, again, even the states only talked about something like recognizing Crimea. But we don't recognize that, which means at some point this too could be corrected with the help of Trident missiles.
It's unlikely he would want to stop this war, because if he really wanted to do that, he would simply have to clearly rein in his, so to speak, overripe protege, who, in essence, wouldn't take a single step to the left or right without the permission of America and Europe.
If you take into account how much tension there was between Ukraine and the United States during the first 4 months of Donald Trump's presidency, then these words from Apti about someone being a protege, we just, well, won't take them seriously. This is how they try to justify why they can't defeat Ukraine. But in such situations, it's always claimed that Ukraine is a satellite of the United States. How long did we fight the Russians while American military aid was frozen? Did that happen a lot? You know, I'm just thinking now, why did the Russians actually agree to some concessions directly related to the war? Because a new batch of 8 SEMS arrived, and they have a special stamp on them to the Ukrainian military and Ukrainian artillery brigades from Donald Trump the Almighty. Maybe it's connected to that. There's definitely something here to analyze in the near future.
They will keep supplying them with weapons, and we need to be ready for that. In general, we need to be prepared for the fact that Europe is rapidly getting ready itself for the possibility that it will have to enter into open confrontation with Russia. All the defense industry plants in both Europe and America are operating around the clock, as they say.
In 3 shifts, that's how it's said. It immediately makes you want to ask a question and answer it yourself. Who made it so that the West restarted its entire military and defense industry, huh? Wasn't it VVH by any chance, huh? So the important point is that weapons will be supplied to Ukraine under any circumstances. That is, regardless of the outcome of these negotiations we're talking about now.
In 3 shifts, without stopping, the armies are recruiting more and more soldiers, preparing them to enter into combat. That's why we also need to understand that we can't afford to relax. They will give them everything as long as they can manage to defeat us. In principle, of course, whatever they do, they are not capable of it because
Abdi believes in God. What's interesting is that now he appeals not to VVH and not even to Ramzan Akhmatovich, but specifically to God, to Allah. In general, they've all become very religious over there. Let them pray. It won't affect the flight of a the Trident missile in any way, but that's the outlook. That is, there may be a freeze, meaning the transition of their hot phase of the war to a cold phase. Well, what does that mean? It will be roughly like the 8 years in Donbass. I don't believe that a freeze is even possible, at least not fully. There are just too many contradictions on this issue. They want us gone, and we want to live. Where's the compromise in that?
I'll say it again. Russia is a country beloved by God. Yes, they are causing us a lot of damage economically.
Yeah, economically. And in what other way?
And in all other aspects as well, as they say. But at the same time, they don't have the power to crush Russia.
If the West wanted to do that, they would have done it long ago, economically and accordingly in other ways as well. Well, I mean, the bodies of Russian soldiers, there's more than enough of that on Telegram, not just on mine, but that's how they see the situation before Witkoff's arrival. And by the way, I think this assessment is accurate because the American approach is very straightforward. As for how is it, the demilitarization of Ukraine, it is possible, but only on a parity basis with the Russian Federation. Whoever came up with that phrase in the States is, of course, simply a genius of foreign policy. All the more so, well, Apte is a very interesting guy. In every difficult situation, you know what he does? He says that nothing is clear. That's exactly what he says. It's just that absolutely nothing is clear at all, not even in the entire Sumy region, which is quite concerning. But right now, we're going to explain a bit about what's happening in the Sumy region. In the Sumy region, it's important to note the Russian forces are currently getting hit very hard, and in some specific places, they are actively retreating with considerable speed toward the state border.
I can say that every counteroffensive by our enemy has always been prepared by the NATO bloc's Committee of Chiefs of Staff. As we know, this committee has a lot of resources, especially in intelligence and under the guidance of their handlers from America and Europe.
Yes, Trump is ours, and the NATO generals from Europe are ours too. If Abdi starts talking about the NATO headquarters developing operations, do you know what that means? It means that somewhere they took a serious beating, and those serious kebabs, lula kebabs, made from pork, yes. Let them not worry about that. This is the Sumy direction, Sumy region.
They strike us every time. Let's hope that we can anticipate this strike and do everything so that the enemy is unable to enter the territory of the Russian Federation. As they say, we'll all be watching in the coming days. I think we'll see the situation unfold as it happens.
Nothing is clear. We'll see everything. But the key phrase is this: we will not allow the Ukrainian army to enter Russian territory. And these people will confidently tell us later that everything is going well for them at the front and in the war. In short, it's a fresh tale, but it's hard to believe. And not only Ukraine is interested in ending the hostilities, but also fascist Russia. That's also a fact. I understand that Putin doesn't care at all about his orcs, how many of them will be eliminated in Ukraine, but nevertheless, war is just too expensive. And one of the aspects is, of course, financial losses and the loss of common sense. But attention, Russia also got seriously put in its place in the post-Soviet space. That is, now Russia has completely lost its authority. And to confirm this significant development, there is indeed a very important piece of news that makes the Kremlin's high and mighty, including, for example, this particularly tough guy here. Just take a good look at him, have a profoundly sad and disheartened expression on their faces. He will probably only begin to cheer up and regain his composure after an event of this magnitude and significance truly takes place. As I have already clearly stated, the rope should unequivocally be yellow and blue, symbolizing something very specific and important. What does this mean? Trump will receive the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan in an attempt to sign a peace agreement. If the information from the Washington Post is correct, and Aliyev and Pashinyan sign a peace agreement in Trump's presence, it means that Russia's influence in the Caucasus has been reduced to zero. And if it becomes widely known, if the crucial information is definitively confirmed that the strategically vital Zangezur corridor will indeed be controlled by an American private military company, then that's absolutely it, the complete and utter end for that Russian maniac. But as they often say, trouble never truly comes alone, and difficult situations tend to multiply. So the nation of Moldova has also definitively left the chat, the Kremlin's political chat, that is, for good.
7 years in a penal colony. Confiscation of property worth almost $1.5 million. Such a sentence was handed down by the so-called Democratic Court of Chisinau to the head of the Gagauz autonomy, Evgenia Gutsul, on trumped-up charges.
But why was it trumped up? She was simply in the position of a cashier, a mere cashier, nothing more, while Shor, accordingly, was able to remain in Chisinau, his location of choice. When he fled to Moscow, she was the one transporting the money. And so they just went and locked her up. And, you know, we live in a world where everyone knows perfectly well who is a Kremlin agent. But in the past, we too went through this period in our history for quite a long time. It was not customary to touch Kremlin agents because it was believed that they had Moscow protection, and accordingly that protection could do something, could exert some influence. But now that's it.
After the verdict was announced, Gutsul was immediately taken under heavy guard to the detention center. Hundreds of outraged supporters gathered outside the courthouse, clashing with law enforcement officers. Shame, down with the dictatorship.
Oh, whenever I hear Skabiva say the phrase "down with the dictatorship," it makes me smile a little. You have to admit it's funny. Seriously, down with the dictatorship. Listen to how they're singing now. But really, we're witnessing the Russian agency being dismantled right before our eyes. And that's wonderful.
Kremlin spokesperson Peskov stated that the trial is a vivid example of pressure on political opponents. Chairwoman of the Federation Council, Matvienko, described what happened as a cynical act of political repression against
a pro-Russian candidate. But actually, behind all this chatter, Margarita Simonian is basically threatening everyone with death and punishment. She wants to throw everyone in jail who was involved in imprisoning Gutsul. But the real issue is something else. The issue is that Russia's influence in this region is shrinking, and Putin isn't going to come flying in on a blue helicopter to save Gutsul. That's all there is to it. The Kremlin's agent will go to jail.
In her statement, the convicted individual emphasized that the verdict was a blow to the entire Moldovan democratic system and represents an attempt to intimidate the opposition ahead of the upcoming elections in September.
Yes, they do have their own nuances over there. Honestly, in the current geopolitical climate, under any circumstances, I would look for legal ways to simply prevent all Kremlin agents and pro-Russian forces from participating in the elections. Once again, if they win, they will simply imprison or kill these Democrats or those who advocate for common sense and the European Union. Here, it seems to me everything is actually very simple. This is the new Russia. And playing these games, pretending it's democracy, giving them a chance and all that, at the very least, it's irrational. Of course, if I were on Maya Sandu's team, I would say that we need to create some kind of pro-Russian party with a reasonable approach. In other words, a controlled pro-Russian party, so that Vadim and others would have someone to vote for and wouldn't get anxious. But the fact remains that open Kremlin agents have no place in politics.
The conflict between Moldova's central authorities, Sandu, and the Gagauz autonomy escalated after Gutsul publicly advocated for developing relations with Russia. Sandu's government also tried to challenge the results of Gutsul's election. In March 2025, the politician was detained at Chisinau airport on fabricated charges.
But the money was real.
Evgenia Gutsul is only 38. I know her very well. She is a very brave, confident, and strong politician.
Ideally, for optimal interaction and to truly foster a deeper connection, you should definitely be situated in neighboring bunks, in close proximity to one another, to genuinely get to know each other much better and build a stronger bond. In bunks in the cell? Well, how else? Although I'm afraid that game won't work with Olya Skabiva. But regarding the cell, there's an important point. Gutsul didn't advocate for developing relations with Russia, but in fact for the liquidation of Moldova. We heard voices like that in Donbass at one time. Now they're defecating in bags, and some complain there's no water. Although everyone understands perfectly well that this is exactly what Russia brings, destruction and death. Be that as it may, we're keeping an eye on when Trump wakes up, and there will be a lot of corresponding statements. We support the armed forces of Ukraine. I want to thank everyone for helping us complete the fundraiser for the Khartia Brigade of the National Guard. That's awesome, and it's important because, once again, any signing of documents does not mean peace or peace agreements. It means a ceasefire, and that means supporting the defense forces at the highest state and public level will remain a priority for many years to come. So your contributions are very, very timely. Thank you all very much. Subscribe to the channel. Here we call things by their proper names. And yes, Russia is shrinking in the post-Soviet space. You will pay for our Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut and Mariupol and Donetsk and Sevastopol so dearly that you'll be stunned. Because this is not the end of the story, not the end. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.